Hello, everyone, hope you're doing well today. Let's get into it. Today we are going to talk about 3 more not-so-wonderful women. Jenny Jones was an American serial killer, born July 13, 1950. She was responsible for the deaths of up to 60 infants and children. She was a licensed vocational nurse during the 1970s and 80s. Jenny used injections of digoxin, heparin, and later succinylcholine to induce medical crises in her patients. The exact number is unknown. In the early life of Jenny, she was adopted by a nightclub owner and his wife. She worked as a beautician before attending nursing school in the late 1970s. Jenny married her high school sweetheart in 1968 and divorced in 1974. They had 1 child together. 3 years later, they reconciled and had another child in 1977. Again, the marriage ended. Just before her indictment, she married again to a 19-year-old nursing assistant. He filed for a divorce a short time later. While Jenny worked as LVN at the Bexar County Hospital, now University of San Antonio, in the pediatric intensive care unit. A large number of children died in her care. The hospital was in fear of being sued, so it asked all of its LVNs to resign. No further investigation was pursued by the hospital at this time. Jenny then took a position at a pediatrician's clinic in Kerrville, Texas, 60 miles northwest of San Antonio. It was here that she was charged with poisoning 6 children. The doctor's office discovered 2 puncture marks in a bottle of succinylcholine in the drug storage, where only Jones had access. The bottle was placed back in storage, heavily diluted with water. Succinylcholine is a powerful short-acting paralytic that causes temporary paralysis of all skeletal muscles, as well as those that control breathing. In 1985, Jenny was sentenced to 99 years in prison for killing a 15-month-old girl. Later that year, she was sentenced to a concurrent term of 60 years for nearly killing an infant boy. Jones was set for release in 2018 due to overcrowding. To avoid this, Jones was indicted on May 25, 2017 for the murder of an 11-month-old boy. The new charges were filed to prevent her release. In April 2018, a judge in San Antonio denied a request to dismiss 5 new murder indictments against Jones. On January 16, 2020, Jones pleaded guilty to the murder of the 11-month-old. Jones was sentenced to life in prison. She is eligible for parole when she is about 87 years old. In my opinion, she should never be let out. There is nothing worse than a person who hurts or kills children, the elderly and animals. To kill at all is not acceptable. Let's take a look at Velma Barfield now. She was also an American serial killer who was convicted of 1 murder, but eventually confessed to 6 in total. Velma was the first woman in the United States to be executed after the 1976 resumption of capital punishment, and the first since 1962. She was also the first woman to be executed by lethal injection. Velma was born and raised in North Carolina. Her father was reported to be physically abusive to her, and her mother did not intervene. In 1949, Velma married Thomas Burke, and together they had 2 children and were happy until she had a hysterectomy and developed back pain, which led to a behavioral change and substance addiction. Her husband began to drink, then complaints turned into bitter arguments. On April 4, 1969, when Thomas passed out, Velma left with the children. When they returned, they found the house burned and Thomas dead. In 1970, she remarried to Jennings Barfield less than a year later. He died on March 22, 1971 from heart complications. In 1974, Velma's mother showed symptoms of intense diarrhea, vomiting and nausea, in which she recovered from a few days later. During the Christmas season later that year, her mother fell ill again with the same symptoms, but died in the hospital a few hours after being admitted on December 30, 1974. In 1975, Velma was convicted of 7 counts of writing bad checks and sentenced to 6 months, released after serving 3. In 1976, Velma began caring for the elderly. She cared for Montgomery and Dolly Edwards. He fell ill and died on January 29, 1977. Just over a month after the death of her husband, Dolly experienced symptoms identical to Velma's mother and died in March. Velma later confessed to the murder of Dolly the following year. She then took another job caring for a 76-year-old man who broke his leg. On June 4, 1977, his stomach and chest along with vomiting and diarrhea caused him nerve-wracking pains. He died soon after. Velma later confessed to his murder. At this time, Velma's boyfriend, who was also a relative of Dolly, was thought to discover that she had been writing checks on his account, had to be eliminated also. She mixed rat poison into his beer and tea. Edwards died on February 3, 1978. While she was trying to nurse him back to health, an autopsy discovered the truth behind his death. Velma denied this murder after confessing to the others. She was tried and convicted of only one of the murders. Velma was imprisoned at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, in an area for escape-prone prisoners and mentally ill prisoners. Because there was no designated areas for women under death sentences at that time, and she was the state's only female death row inmate. During her stay, she became a devout Christian. Her devotion was so strong that an effort was made to obtain a commutation to life. Velma was executed on November 2, 1984, at the same prison where she was housed. She released a statement before the execution that read, "I know that everybody has gone through a lot of pain. All the families connected, and I am sorry. And I want to thank everybody who have been supporting me all these 6 years." She was buried in a small, rural North Carolina cemetery near her first husband. Velma's last meal was cheese doodles and Coca-Cola. Before I start the third story, we want to take a minute to thank the few who have viewed, liked and subscribed. Everyone matters and everything counts. Thank you. Alright, last one for this story is Hélène Jégado. She was a French domestic servant and serial killer. She is believed to have killed as many as 36 people with arsenic over a period of 18 years. Between 1833 to 1841, then took a break and started again in 1851. Hélène was born on a small farm in Plouhinec, near Brittany in France. She lost her mother when she was 7 and was sent to work with her to aunts who were servants at the rectory of Burby. After 17 years, she went with one of her aunts to the town of Seglion. She became a cook for the cure, where an incident arose where she was accused of adding hemp from his grain house to his soup. Her first suspected poisoning occurred in 1833 when she was employed by Honor the priest in the nearby village of Guern. In the 3 months between June 28th and October 3rd, 7 members of the household suddenly died, including the priest himself, his mother and father, and her own sister, and Jégado. Her apparent sorrow and pious behavior was so convincing that she was not suspected. Happening shortly after the cholera epidemic of 1832, the deaths may have been attributed to natural causes. Hélène returned to Babri to replace her sister, where 3 people, including her aunt, died within 3 months. All of them she cared for at their bedsides. She then relocated to Lockmine, where she boarded with a needleworker and her daughter and son. Both mother and daughter died and the son fell ill. In the same town, a widow offered her a room. She also died after eating soup that Hélène had prepared. In May 1835, Hélène was hired by a Madame Toussaint. 4 more deaths followed. 7 people by this point were already in their graves. Later, in 1835, she was employed as a servant in a convent in Auray, but was quickly dismissed after several incidents of vandalism and sacrilege. She worked as a cook in other households in Auray, then in Pontivy and Port Louis. Only for a short time in each home, often some fell ill or died. Her most infamous murders was that of a child, who died at the Château d'Issoy. In May 1841, that was 10 years and 1 month before her arrest. There was no record of suspected deaths from late 1841 to 1849. Although her employers reported a number of thefts, she was caught several times. In 1849, she moved to Rennes, the capital city of the region. Not much is known why she committed these crimes. It can maybe be linked to mental issues. In 1850, she joined the household staff of Théophile Bidard, a law professor at the University of Rennes. One of his servants fell ill and died when Hélène tended to her. In 1851, one of the other servants also fell ill and died. Hélène aroused suspicion when she announced her innocence before she was even asked anything. She was arrested July 1, 1851. Later, she was linked to 23 suspected deaths by poisoning between 1833 and 1841, but none were investigated since they were outside the 10-year statute of limitations, and No scientific evidence. Her trial began on December 6, 1851, but due to certain laws, she was only accused of 3 deaths, 3 attempted murder, and 11 thefts. At least one later case was dropped since it involved a child, and police were reluctant to upset the parents by exhuming the child. Helene's behavior in court was erratic, going from humble muttering to loud pious shouting and occasional violent outbursts against her accusers. She denied she even knew what arsenic was. Hélène was sentenced to death by guillotine in front of a large crowd on the Champs Mars in Rennes on February 26, 1852. I hope you enjoyed this story. As you can see, I am trying to make them a little more interesting and learning more editing, so please bear with me. Thank you. Please like and subscribe and take good care of yourselves. Good night all.